Welcome to SRG Insights, where we answer your questions about sales, sales management, and sales training. Today's question is,
what is the number one trait I should look for when hiring a salesperson?
great question, and one that we've actually thought quite a bit about. And there's an interesting article and book written on this topic that gets to the concept of grit. A psychologist named Angela Duckworth defined grit as passion and perseverance. And it, more than any other factor, is the one that predicts success across a number of different disciplines and studies, such as military candidates or cadets, such as inner city school children, and interestingly enough, for salespeople. So even though we would argue for interviewing for analytical ability, emotional intelligence, curiosity, work ethic, there's a number of things that you would want to look for. Grit can be one of the best predictors of success and one that we feel is very important in an interview process. Grit is that tenacity that says they're going to stick with the deal and they're going to do what it takes to get it done. And it's not necessarily the smartest person or the best educated person who is going to demonstrate this ethic. Typically, it's somebody who has shown and demonstrated in the past that they can do what gets done. So oftentimes these look like athletes, musicians, performers, people who have gone that extra mile in practice and in the discipline and knows what it's like to fail, pull themselves up, dust themselves off, and get on and ultimately win the deal. So we actually suggest a behavioral-based interviewing technique using what we call STAR questions: situation, task, action, and result, as a way of getting to whether the candidate has grit and has demonstrated grit. Some of the examples that you might use might include, tell me about a time you struggled to accomplish a goal. What did you do and what came out of that? Or you might ask, when was the last time you failed at something? What happened and what did you learn? And a third example might be, tell me about a big deal you were in jeopardy of losing. What did you do and what came out of that? So you can see how these behavioral-based interviewing questions might get to that underlying idea of whether the person has demonstrated grit in the past and likely will be that person who demonstrates grit on your sales team and will actually win those deals and get the business done. The other aspect that's very important and really interesting around grit is whether you can build it. So if you haven't been able to hire that person for grit, and you're saying, well, how do I build a grittier sales team? And it's one that Duckworth has actually studied quite extensively in her new book that was just published on grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. And what she suggests is there are a number of factors that you can look at to build grit into your sales team or into a team in general. And we've kind of paraphrased and adapted these for the sales environment. The first is really to model gritty behavior. So as a sales manager, you should be doing those things that demonstrate what grit looks like. That may be working the extra hours, coming in early, staying late to work on that proposal or that presentation. They really need to see that, oh, this is what it's going to take, and we're going to follow that. They will follow a good example if it's given to them. The second is really to have a vision and to communicate that vision. So this is really that people will perform grittier behavior or will be more willing to persevere and do what it takes if they believe in what they're doing and they're bought into that vision. So having a clear vision and communicating what the sales team is trying to accomplish can be really important for helping to develop grit on your team. The third area, and one that I think is especially important, is to set very high expectations. And those teams that are able to create a gritty culture, a high-performing culture, are ones that set extremely high expectations, demand a lot of their people, and then celebrate when they achieve those results. And in fact, they can find that people will step up to a much higher level than they even thought possible if they have those high expectations set for them and they see other people performing at that higher level. The fourth area, and there are two more, the fourth area is to create a competitive environment where people are competing against each other and competing at a high level. And in fact, just the word compete comes from Latin, which means to strive together. It's not a win-lose situation, but it's that the team is competing to achieve higher goals. It can help create a gritty environment. And the final piece is to create an environment of coaching. And this is around the idea of a growth mindset where everybody should be thinking about improving and that it's okay to talk about performance, and it's okay to talk about those things that we can do to even improve our game to a little higher level. And that's the whole idea of that coaching mindset, and that some of the things we can do to encourage the grit and the perseverance and the passion on our team to perform to higher and higher levels. So these are just some of the suggestions. First, you want to hire for grit if you can, which answers the question. We think it's one of the most important traits. And then we should really be working to build a grittier sales team, a high-performing sales team, and that may require demonstrating some of our own grit as a sales manager.